It's that time of year again. The weather has finally started to cool down, at least where I live. The leaves are falling, the air is muggy, and it feels bad to be outside. It's only a matter of time before the clowns start popping back up again. Thanks, Skarsgård. But when you're cuddled up sick in your house staring at your television, there isn't a better time to turn to the horror genre for entertainment. So strap in and let's take a look at 10 of my personal favorites today. And just as a warning, these are in no particular order, and I obviously have to see a movie in order for it to be on this list. So if one of your favorites are not here, I'm sorry, but that's life. Let's start off with some quick honorable mentions. Some great films that can get under your skin, but may or may not be classified as a horror movie. First of all, I'm going to lump together The Silence of the Lambs and Seven, two extremely good films about trying to stop a notorious killer. One has an icon by the name of Hannibal Lecter, who really isn't even the main villain of the movie. The other has an icon by the name of Morgan Freeman. What's not to love? Saw, the movie that spawned way too many sequels, including one this year that I, unfortunately, will probably end up seeing. But the first film had great atmosphere, a great idea, and was done pretty well, even if the acting wasn't that great at times. Godzilla, King of the Monsters. I love this movie to death, everyone knows it. And while it could technically be classified as a horror film, I can't rank it as one of my favorites in that regard. But it still has great atmosphere, music, acting, etc., and it still has the most sequels to any movie ever, and they are still making them. I cannot wait for the King Kong vs. Godzilla remake. 10 Cloverfield Lane. Being trapped in a bunker with an overly creepy John Goodman. The ending was very shark jumpy, but otherwise a solid film. Onward! Number 10. Just realized 10 Cloverfield Lane could have been perfect here. Oh well. Number 10. Evil Dead, the remake. Now, before you start screaming at me, I actually only saw the original Evil Dead a few hours before I saw the remake in the theater I worked at. And I gotta be honest, the remake, in my eyes, blew the original out of the water. Now, since then, I have not watched Evil Dead 2 or The Army of Darkness, and I know I need to. So I'm just gonna look at the original here. I found the possessed people more annoying rather than scary in the original, constantly shouting and all that. And although the makeup was great and the effects were good, I just felt the remake did it better. The remake, from what I understand, also had very little CG, instead using practical effects and makeup, much like the original, and every blow these people take hurts more and more. Strangely enough, I felt the worst when Maya gets the machete drug across her knee. Yeah. Also felt really bad for Eric, the hippie-looking dude. He gets so messed up in this movie. The other characters are pretty much expendable and are just fodder for the extreme gore and horror deaths. I know, saying you like a remake more than the original is a cardinal sin most of the time, but the tension and brutality of this film makes me wince every time. It's brutal, it's horrific, it's effective, and it's groovy. Number 9. Get Out. A newer film, only being released this year, 2017, Get Out is an intense film spanning not just the horror genre, but also throwing in mystery and some comedy as well. I didn't get a chance to see this film in the theaters, instead only seeing it very recently in my film studies class, and I was pretty blown away. The film is amazing with building tension, as the main character Chris and his girlfriend go up to her parents' house over the weekend, in a secluded area out in the country. It deals with a lot of racial issues, with the main character being given super weird vibes when placed in an almost all-white environment. And it's not completely unjustified. The family acts super weird around him, and it eventually escalates into genuine panic, and even more into some terrifying aspects of this family. I was on the edge of my seat the entire running time of this movie. I highly recommend it. Number 8. Jaws. The film that made people afraid to go back in the water. If you don't know about this movie, you've probably been living under a rock. A giant great white shark has decided to make the shores of Amity Island its new home. After the remains of one person is found, Sheriff Martin Brody attempts to get the beaches closed to ward off any more injuries. This ends up not happening due to a very stupid mayor deciding to put the money the tourism would bring in over the safety of the beachgoers. Eventually, Brody, a fisherman named Quint, and Matt Hooper go off on the Orca, no, not the fish, the boat, to attempt to hunt the beast. These three really have a good chemistry about them. My favorite scenes are when they're below deck on the boat and they start telling stories about their scars. All laughs and smiles until Quint talks about the USS Indianapolis, which is arguably just as creepy as any scene with the shark.
Shark comes to the nearest man, that man he start pounding and hollering and screaming. Sometimes the shark would go away. Sometimes he wouldn't go away.
Another great scene is when they are all singing together. It's just great chemistry all around. Jaws is a fantastic example of the slow burn. You never really see the shark until they are on the boat. Instead, you only get clues when the shark is near via music cues and POV shots. This is mainly due to the technical difficulties with the shark. The thing just never worked. So instead, they got around that by using methods to make the audience aware of the shark's presence. The best example of this are the yellow barrels. Jaws has great storytelling and suspense. It pretty much started the summer blockbuster, and it is definitely one of the best.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Number 7. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Let's go from a movie that was great with subtlety and atmosphere to a grimy and grainy slasher film released the same year. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre is about a small group of people who come face to face with a family of cannibalistic psychopaths, one of whom is now the famous Leatherface. This movie is very loosely based off of real-life killer Ed Gein, but to my knowledge, Gein was not a cannibal, not from Texas, and had no chainsawing in his murders. But then again, despite the title, the film doesn't have that many chainsaw deaths, and is actually not as gory as you would expect. It gets its shock from its look, the acting, and the brutality of what it does show. Take a look at that hammer shot. Ouch. The film is very raw and realistic looking, and is a rarity as the aged look actually enhances the movie in my opinion. It helps with the overall grimy feel the movie has. The cinematography in general gets across the sheer insanity in play during the entire film. Take the dinner scene, for example. Everything builds up until that final chase scene, and it's wonderful. Number 6, The Thing by John Carpenter. Technically a remake of the movie The Thing from Another World, John Carpenter's The Thing is a horrifying film that is a glorious example of how extreme practical effects can be. Like almost to the point of being a bit too gross, but I digress. The Thing follows a group of scientists in the Antarctic that comes across an alien that was frozen in the ice below. The creature can become anything it touches with 100% accuracy, so it becomes a game of who is real and who isn't in an attempt to survive. And while I could go on about how good the acting is or how good the tension and writing is, etc., the special effects are what this movie is all about. So here are some highlights, and on to the next number. Number 5, It Follows. I actually put up an old review I did on this film a couple months back, and if you watch that, I go into much more detail, so I will keep this brief. It Follows is a great throwback to 80s horror movies with a great premise and great tension. The actors are really good, the music is wonderful, and I really want a sequel. Make it now. Number 4, It 2017. So I'm currently writing a review on this film as well, but I had to include it on this list. I ended up seeing it 3 times in the theater. It was that good. The film covers the portion of the book where the characters are still kids, and compared to the TV miniseries where it went back and forth. It follows the Losers Club, dealing with the ever-growing threat of bullies, a killer clown, and their ever-coming puberty. All the kids are great actors, even if a couple of them get left out more than the others. But that's bound to happen when there are so many to focus on. I also love young Kevin Bacon with a mullet, Draco Malfoy, Jack Black, and Kylo Ren as the bullies. Bill Skarsgård was a fantastic choice for Pennywise. I personally feel like he's much better than Tim Curry's version in the miniseries. I feel actual tension and some fear when I'm watching the film, which I just don't feel when I watch the miniseries. It has plenty of scares, but also plenty of laughs with the kids, specifically Richie, and while it is pretty brutal when violence is shown, it is highly entertaining, and I suggest watching it immediately if you haven't seen it already. Number 3, Alien. In Alien, a space merchant vessel receives a distress call from an unknown source. Upon landing and going to investigate, one of the members, played by the late John Hurt, is attacked by the Facehugger, which ends up turning into the well-known Xenomorph, and the rest goes from there. The Xeno kills off the crew one by one, much like a slasher movie villain, until Ripley is the final survivor. The last girl, like in a lot of horror movies. The film is very slow. I feel like I do need to say that. For anyone that maybe has never seen the movie and wants to, I feel like you need to be in the right mindset in order to sit down and watch Alien. It is a wonderful movie. The sets are gorgeous and packed to the brim with detail. The acting is great, especially the dinner scene. The pacing may be slow and the film is very quiet, but that just makes the moments that stick out really stick out. Number 2, The Exorcist. As for the horror genre, a genre that is notorious for not being respected that much, this film is seen as a legend. It won a number of Academy and Golden Globe Awards, and that is rare for horror. If somehow you've never heard of it, The Exorcist is a crazy thrill ride of a film where the villain isn't a big, scary alien or a guy with a chainsaw, but a little girl. A little girl possessed by a demon, and the events that take place to try and get this demon out of her. The special effects in this movie are shocking and disturbing to this day, and Mercedes McCambridge gives a chilling voice as the demon possessing Reagan. And while the amount of terror you feel toward this movie will probably vary depending on who you are and what you believe in, I would personally rank this as one of the best horror movies of all time.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
And number 1, Halloween. While this list in general is not saying that any one of these films are objectively better than the other, or that I enjoy any of them more than the next, I will have to say that Halloween is breaking that rule, as it is my personal favorite horror movie of all time. I remember one of the first times I ever rented a slasher movie. I was hanging out with one of my middle school friends. We rented the original Friday the 13th and the original Halloween. We made it through Friday the 13th just fine, but we were actually both too afraid to watch Halloween that night. Eventually, I did re-rent Halloween. I watched it, and I loved it. The film is a classic for a reason, and I personally think it mostly has to do with Michael Myers and an awesome score by John Carpenter. Otherwise, it's a fairly simple plot. 15 years after murdering his sister on Halloween night, Michael Myers returns to Haddonfield after escaping a mental hospital to kill again. The actor that stands out in this film is Donald Pleasance, and obviously other people agreed, since he was in every Halloween movie, except 3, until he unfortunately passed away after shooting for Halloween 6. He just gives this chilling performance trying to get people to understand the danger Haddonfield is in. The speech on Michael when he was a child is the perfect example.
I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
Michael is such a looming presence in this film. He isn't loud and destructive, but like a shadow. Halloween is a staple in the horror genre, and while the sequels began to get worse and worse as they went on, it is still one of my favorite franchises, except for Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. But I am super excited for the new movie coming out next year, especially since Jamie Lee Curtis and John Carpenter are returning to the series. If it's ever going to return to its former glory, this is its best chance. Well, guys, those are my favorite horror movies, but what are yours? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe and please hit that bell so you know exactly when videos come out in the future. Take it easy.